The number one theory revolving around All Might is what? Is All Might turning from his Small Might form to his All Might form a quirk? Many people accept the idea that just because All Might is quirkless, him transforming from a Small Might to his All Might form is something that should not be emphasized at all. But I would beg to differ. One of the first things we learned about All Might that distinguished him from Deku is that he was able to use One for All from the jump because he had a special body. Those were the words of Gran Torino himself. And not only is there a visual difference between the Small Might form and the All Might form, in episode 1 of My Hero Academia, he literally was in his Small Might form and no one thought that he was All Might. So visually, in the story, narratively, they're two different people. But the main feat, if you will, that really spearheaded this idea of All Might's body being just different is his fight against All for One. And in particular, one specific scene where All Might has a buff left arm, and when All for One tries to attack him, he literally transfers the left buff arm to his right buff arm as if he's Popeye. There's no way I can unsee the fact that All Might's body, for some reason, is just weird. It just allows him to do things that nobody else is able to do. Nobody besides one person. Listen to me when I say this. All Might has surpassed the singularity. But in thinking about it, I don't know if you would agree to this conclusion. You need some groundwork. You need some context as to how I came to this conclusion from a different conclusion. So I'm gonna postpone that, and I'm gonna tell you something about the Quirk singularity. The Quirk singularity is a theory that was created, or rather founded and popularized by Kusai, which is Dr. Ujiko, the same doctor that is working with the League of Villains in All for One. The theory is based off of Dr. Ujiko's observation of the quirks that are generated from generation to generation. He noticed that whenever two people mate and conceive a child, the child's quirk consists of one of three different options. The first option is one of the parents' quirks. So characters like Mirio, who got the same quirk as his father. Option number 2 is a combination of both your parents' quirks, like Bakugo, who has a combination of his mother's nitroglycerin skin and his father's acid sweat, which when combined creates a new quirk, Explosion. And the third option, which is extremely rare, having both of your parents' quirks. And currently, there's only one person that I'm tracking in the entire story of My Hero Academia that has both of his parents' quirks. And we know that that is Shoto. And observing the generations and generations of quirks that are being manifested in the world, Dr. Ujiko also noticed that with every new manifested quirk, the power of the quirk was significantly stronger than that of their parents. So he made a theory that says with every generation of quirk users, the quirk will get stronger. And eventually there will come a time where the quirks are so strong that the person wielding the quirk will be incapable of actually using it. All Dr. Ujiko was trying to do was warn everybody about this phenomena that it will eventually happen. But no one wanted to believe him. No one outside of All for One. And when All for One picked up on Dr. Ujiko's theory, he took that information and from that point on decided to create a plan that would allow him to be able to supersede the future events of the Quirk singularity. A plan that would eventually end temporarily when he meets All Might. Dr. Ujiko, although he is right in his assessment and observation on the Quirk singularity theory, there's one ginormous thing that Dr. Ujiko never considered in his assessment when looking at the Quirk singularity theory. Dr. Ujiko's Quirk singularity theory is only based on the idea that as the quirks evolve throughout generations, the biological structure or the body and genetics of the quirk user is not evolving as well. So if by chance we can identify the evolution of the biological structure of humans in My Hero Academia that is separate from the evolution of the manifestation of quirks in My Hero Academia, then that would essentially complete the otherwise incomplete theory of Dr. Ujiko's Quirk singularity theory. A good way to visualize what it is that I'm saying is having like two charts. One line shows the growth, evolution, and power of quirks from generation to generation, and the other line shows the evolution of the biological structure of a basic human from generation to generation. And this is where I'm gonna blow your mind. I think. I probably I hope I do. There are characters that are perfect examples for the evolution of the physical structure of human evolution that aren't affected by their quirks, meaning their quirk has no effect to their physical mutation. One of the best two examples in My Hero Academia are Fumikage Tokoyami and Koji Koda from Class 1A. Both of these characters are visibly mutated beings. Yes, they are humans, but Tokoyami literally has a bird head and Koda visibly has a rock head. I don't even know what it is, but the point of emphasis is that Tokoyami has a quirk, Dark Shadow, which essentially is allowing him to emit a sentient shadow from himself, which he's able to control. And Koda has the quirk Voice, which allows him to control and speak with any animal in the world. Now, if you haven't noticed by now, Dark Shadow and Voice are not mutant type quirks, meaning the quirk didn't create the mutation that they visibly have on their body. And that is a very important thing when looking at how one gets their quirk in the first place. So in seeing that Koda was born with the body that he had from his mom, it's fair to say that Tokoyami's mom or dad likely has a bird head. And because that is true, this is where my parallel position of the quirk singularity theory comes true, which is that just as through generation and generation, the quirks are evolving, through generations and generation, the biological structure of humans are also evolving. And if it is accurate to say that the biological structure of humans is evolving by each generation, albeit at a slower pace than the quirks are evolving at each generation, what that does mean is that eventually there will come a time in which humans will be able to equip the powers that is superseding their bodies, which will eventually negate the quirk singularity theory completely. But guess what? All for One already knew this, and it's proven by the main plan he's been orchestrating over the past few decades, which is to find a body strong enough to genetically modify to supersede the evolution of quirks, or to supersede quirk singularity. But what if what All for One is trying to do artificially by, surgically creating a body to be able to surpass the quirk singularity theory? What if someone was actually born into the world of My Hero Academia already surpassed the quirk singularity? Hopefully by now you understand what it is that I'm saying, okay? All Might is that person. That's why All Might is able to use one for all. Now, okay, it makes sense. All right, let me make sense of it real quick. Even when you look at the explanation that All Might is giving about how he transformed from his Small Might form to his All Might form, he says it's like when you're sucking in your gut at the pool, which one isn't really even a valid explanation because he's saying it's like doing that. He's not saying that it is doing that, which is two separate things. But even if that's the case, it still leaves the blatant fact that he's transforming from a small form to a larger form. So what is my explanation as to how All Might is able to do this without a quirk? The answer is relatively simple. The one thing we know for sure, confirmed, is that All Might is quirkless. But the one thing that Horikoshi has not revealed at all for some reason is who in the world is All Might's parents. Now, whether he reveals them or not doesn't matter, but what does matter is that his parents played a huge role in him being who he is today. Because it is my belief that although All Might was born quirkless, he wasn't born with a regular biological structure. Instead, he was born with a body that has evolved to a level surpassing every other person in My Hero Academia, granting him at least the ability to transform his body from a smaller form to a larger form. Which I know sounds crazy because you would think that that would require a quirk. And you would be valid for having those beliefs a year and a half, 2 years ago. But ever since the final war of My Hero Academia, it is 100% possible for All Might to transform his body without having a quirk. Because Shigaraki in his battle against the heroes is in a similar predicament that he was in the Paranormal Liberation War arc, where he's essentially getting jumped by everyone and he isn't allowed to use his quirk due to Monoma copying Aizawa's erasure quirk, effectively erasing Shigaraki's quirk. Meaning Shigaraki is quirkless against the heroes. And yet and still, due to the fact that Shigaraki is 100% done with the genetic modifications that Dr. Uchiko and All for One put on his body to supersede the quirk singularity, his body has evolved to the point where he can mutate his body without having a quirk. So a physical mutation without having a quirk has been demonstrated by two separate people. Shigaraki, who coincidentally got his body through artificial means, and All Might, who got his body through natural means. So all I'm claiming with this theory is that All Might was born from parents who likely had quirks, and either his father or mother had a mutant body within a transformation quirk, that when All Might was conceived, he was granted the natural ability to physically mutate, in this case, transform his body, which ultimately allowed him to supersede the powers of One for All, effectively proving that he surpassed the quirk singularity. Wing your zone every single day.